So we're tasked to determine the zeros of the polynomial function f of x equals x cubed minus 3x squared plus x minus 3. Enter the zeros separated by commas. We'll do that at the end. And yeah, I just figured out I should blow up my screen because you can't see the left side when it's tiny anyway. So I'm a little slow-witted. Let's see. Okay, so here's our polynomial. And of course, we're going to try to find the factors of those polynomials to factor this into three factors. Why those three factors will tell us the zeros of the polynomial by setting each of the factors equal to 0. So in order to factor this, I can choose from an infinite list of x's because right now I have no idea, right? And so my probability of getting the correct x, let's try 1/17, is 1 out of infinity. We can narrow those odds or increase the probability of getting the correct polynomial by deploying or using Descartes' rational zeros theorem. And that would require me to take this lead coefficient and this constant and find the factors of that constant, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, and this lead coefficient, find the factors of the lead coefficient, which is plus or minus 1, and then find all the possible combinations of those factors as a ratio of the p's over the q's. And so because this is 1, I'm just going to get plus or minus 1 and plus or minus 3. So now I'm going to choose of those four numbers. Now I have a 1 in 4 chance of getting a getting a 0 when I choose 1 out of 4. So I'd have a 25% chance. Now I happen to have looked at this beforehand and I know what it is. You may not. So you might have to try all four of those before you get to the one that is the 0. I'm going to shortcut this video and choose 3. Okay. Again, you might try 1 and it won't work. -1 and it won't work. -3 it won't work, and then 3 and it'll finally work. Remember, for it to work, we have to get a clear division, meaning that that factor would divide the original polynomial, meaning the remainder is 0. So I'm going to copy down the coefficients of my polynomial, 1, -3, 1, and -3. And I'm going to start doing a little synthetic division dance. 3 times 1 is 3. And then remember, I'm adding. -3 plus 3 is 0. I'm going to take this 3 multiplied times 0 and get 0. Add those, I get 1. And then take this 3 multiplied times this 1 to get 3. Add those and get 0. And notice that I get a remainder of 0, which means my polynomial is now factored, at least by one binomial, and that's x minus 3. Remember, this is my root, or 0, which means my factor is x minus 3. Remember, how did we get that? When I set the factor equal to 0 and then solve for x, I get x equals 3. That's my root, or 0. This is my factor. Okay, so x minus 3. And this quotient is x squared plus 0x minus plus 1, which of course is x squared plus 1, and that's my function. Okay, hopefully this, I had a bunch of extra stuff, so I did an edit here, and so hopefully this comes out clean. Now that I have that, I have a quadratic, and we have better tools than synthetic division or polynomial division to factor a quadratic. We can factor a quadratic either by factoring by grouping if the lead coefficient is not 1. If the lead coefficient is 1, like in this case, we could just factor, which I would suggest is a little bit on the difficult side because you have to think of this as a difference of squares. And I know most of you wouldn't think of it that way. If you wanted to, I'll get you started, but I don't want to confuse a whole bunch of people and get into this. But you can think of it like that, and then factor it as a difference of squares. Do not forget to take the square root of -1. Okay. The other way is you could use the quadratic formula. That will spit out automatically the correct answer, and that will work perfectly fine. I would suggest there's a little bit faster way, and that's what I'm going to do here. You can just set this equal to 0. It is a factor. And then I can just do, as you would say, or algebra or arithmetic. I would say equation manipulation maybe. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. X squared equals -1. And I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I'm going to write it this way. Taking the square root of x squared is the same as raising it to the 1/2. And I'm doing this only to reiterate or emphasize this rational exponent stuff. Remember, when I multiply those two, I get x to the 1, which is just x. And then over here, this again is the same as taking the square root, so I get this plus or minus the square root of -1. Recall that the square root of -1 is the imaginary number, so that would be I. And so I get x equals plus or minus I. And so if I want to write those factors out, I have x minus 3, and then I have x plus I, x minus I. And of course, when I'm typing that in, I would simply type it in as 3 comma I comma negative I. Oops, I have a P in there somehow, because I don't have big sausage fingers, but anyway. And there we go. That's it for that one. A bit shorter than the others.